Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cherry the Geek TV. I'm Joe Vanourney. It is my favorite time of the year. San Diego Comic-Con is just weeks away. And for those that can't get enough Comic-Con, you can experience Comic-Con all year round at the Comic-Con Museum in San Diego. And there's a brand new exhibit opening today, Spider-Man Beyond Amazing-The Exhibition. And we're going to talk about that with the co-curators, Patrick A. Reed and Ben Saunders. Patrick and Ben, welcome to Cherry the Geek TV.
Thank you so much.
Great to be here.
So for those that don't know, there's this museum that was built in San Diego, Balboa Park. It's near the San Diego Zoo. That's where your exhibit is being held. Can you tell us anything about, for those that don't know, what kind of give a general sense of what that Comic-Con museum, the focus of it is as far as what they do?
Yeah, it is a beautiful facility in the middle of Balboa Park, which is, a historic and gorgeous space. There's a number of other museums around, so we're sort of on the museum row, as it were. And Comic-Con Museum is a museum devoted not just to the medium of comics, but to comic culture. So much as the convention itself represents all of comic culture in all different media, all different fandoms, Comic-Con Museum is a space that celebrates and recognizes all of the different aspects of comic culture. And we've been lucky enough to be asked to curate and work on a Spider-Man show here.
I can't wait to talk about this exhibit. But before we start on that, just give everybody a little background on yourselves. Who are you guys, and what's your job titles, and what is it that you do as far as careers?
Sure. Okay, so my name is Ben Saunders. I'm a professor of English at the University of Oregon, where I founded the world's first minor in comic studies. And I'm also the series editor for the recently launched Penguin Classics Marvel collection, which some of your audience may have heard about. These are carefully sort of cherry-picked and beautifully presented reprints of classic Marvel stories in kind of an affordable package. And I am the curator of the touring exhibition Marvel Universe of Superheroes, which has been touring now for about 4 years and is a big multimedia exhibition launched in Seattle 4 years ago. And it's through working on that Patrick and I have been really working together on that show, and that's how we ended up working together on this one.
Yeah. And I'm Patrick A. Reed. I'm a pop culture journalist and historian. I'm based in New York City. I've worked with Ben on a number of things over the years, a hip hop and comics festival at the University of Oregon. I've done a lot of programming for Comic-Con and various film festivals and pop culture conventions around the country. And I am the associate curator of Marvel Universe of Superheroes, as well as a publicity and marketing consultant. And I am the co-curator with Ben of this. It is the title, but the term Beyond Amazing also, I think, pretty aptly describes the space that we're in right now.
Yeah. If you are a Spider-Man fan, then this is the exhibition of your dreams.
And if you're not a Spider-Man fan, but you happen in here anyway, odds are you will be by the time you leave.
That's right.
Well, I was lucky enough to get to visit the museum back in 2019 on preview night of San Diego Comic-Con. They had they weren't fully open. This was more like a pop-up, but they were open for that weekend. And they had a opening night party 3 years ago for Batman. And I've been telling everybody since that night that not only is that space beautiful and that this museum is going to be amazing, but that night was probably the best offsite that I've ever been to in 20 years of going to San Diego Comic-Con. It's absolutely amazing. I know COVID kind of slowed things down as far as getting people out. Everything kind of shut down, but that gave the museum a chance to focus on their grand reopening, and that's kind of what this is. Starting today with this Spider-Man exhibit. Let's talk about this. I'm very curious. Spider-Man Beyond Amazing. It's a 7,500 square foot exhibit. Is that right? That's a massive size.
It is, and it's also not strictly linear. We effectively, our incredible design and production team have effectively created an entire museum environment within the existing museum. So we have created this sort of winding path and that takes you all the way through the 60-year history of Spider-Man. And you've seen the museum before, but I think you will certainly be astonished to see how much work and attention has gone into the space since 2019.
Well, give us a little taste of what we can expect when we show up at the Comic-Con Museum. What are some of the things that make up this exhibit?
We have rare examples of original comic book art from every significant era of the character. Original pages by Steve Ditko, by John Romita Sr., by Todd McFarlane, by Eric Larson, by John Romita Jr., by who am I forgetting?
Mark Bagley,
by Sarah Kelly. Yeah, it's if you're an original art fan, your mind will already probably be blown. But we also have digital canvases with animation sequences, or a catalog from the huge image library that 60 years worth of Spider-Man comics provides. We are displaying those through various digital means. We also have photo opportunities in terms of life-size sculptures, so you can get your picture with Spidey in at least a couple of different exciting action poses.
As well as a couple of related characters.
We probably don't want to spoil by revealing who they are. We have props, of course, from various movies, including...
we have props and costumes from every one of the recent Spider-Man film series.
That's right. I think something from every movie represented in a series of cases. The exhibition itself is structured more or less chronologically. We begin just before the creation of the character with the early days of the pre-Marvel Revolution of the 1960s. And then we move through decade by decade, but it's punctuated by, we don't want to make people wait until the very end of the show to see things like the movie props. So what we've done is maybe we've got a big reproduction, or perhaps it's a piece of original art with a classic moment, motif, concept, or character, which you also know from the movies. And then next to that, an example of a prop or a costume, so that you can see that direct relationship between the page and the screen. It's constructed in such a way that if you are in a hurry, you can move through this show and really enjoy something in every gallery in 45 minutes. But also, if you are a real fan who wants to do the deep dive and maybe try and catch us out, figure out where we've made mistakes, which is probably inevitable, then there's a version of this show that it could take you
2.5, 3 hours.
I would say 4 hours, maybe, if you wanted to read every word on the touch screens with the menu items, with these sort of illustrated mini essays, if you want to read every label. I think it's a 4 or 5 hour experience potentially.
Yeah, we are definitely big fans, and we're given to, as you can tell, we're given to talking about the things that we're passionate about and we love. But we wanted to make sure that not everybody has to read every word that we wrote. They can also go through, and I should mention that, we've talked about the comics and the films, but there's also pieces of animation. There's a screen with the title sequence from the 1967 Spider-Man cartoon. There are elements featuring video games. There's an entire window of memorabilia and merchandise that shows how Spider-Man has become not just, a comic character and a film character, but he's become a pop culture icon who's pretty much ended up making his mark on every form of popular media.
Yes, and all over the world, so we have examples of comics from Germany, from the UK in the 1960s, from Mexico, the variety of ways in which the character has become a global icon. You will be able to track that path as well.
Now, I grew up, my introduction to Spider-Man was on the Electric Company as a child.
It's in there.
Yeah. How about the Nicholas Hammond 1970s CBS Spider-Man?
Yep. There are references to pretty much every imaginable iteration of Spider-Man in these galleries. Some are major plot beats, some are sort of sprinkled through as Easter eggs, but we're very conscious that everybody that there's a variety of ways that people can have encountered Spider-Man or can have become a fan. So, there are gamers who buy the PS4 games who have never read a comic book. There are people who watch Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends in the 80s, and that was their entry point. And we want to make sure that we build bridges to all of the different potential audiences for this show and give them some of the material that resonates with them, because that then gives us leeway to share all of the myriad of things that we love as well. And once we've, if we're reaching all of these different audiences and then showing them some of the other things that they may also enjoy, then we're doing our job as curators, but also as fans.
Mm-hmm. And we've been helped in this, can't say this enough, by an extraordinarily talented design team that were able to take ideas that we came up with for the presentation of this material and turn it into digital forms of representation, large backlit images. It's going to be difficult for your audience members to see because there are so many screens and behind us. I'm not sure how much of that is registering, but we used a variety of media techniques because of this great design team that we were working with to present this material. And of course, I should also say a word of thank you to the private collectors who loaned pieces of original art for this show. As you are no doubt aware, there isn't an archive of original comic book art in that Marvel has been giving the artwork back to the artists since the 1980s. So if we want to show this historic material, we have to go to private collectors, private lenders, and beg them to let us display this classic Steve Ditko page. And they have done, without the generosity of those individuals, this show wouldn't be possible.
You address the collectors, you address the design team, and we talked about the production team. We also should mention Marvel Entertainment and their partnership and collaboration in this, giving us, the reins to celebrate 60 years of Spider-Man in a physical space is an immense privilege and an immense joy. And I'm very thankful and also really honored that we were able to do this. They're letting us play with these toys, and it's incredible.
Give people a kind of an idea. How long does it take to put something like this together? Like, for example, when were you approached, and or when did you come? I don't know, when the idea was developed. How long did it take before that idea was introduced to what we have now?
I'd say there were a couple different answers. One is that we'd previously worked together on the Marvel show, so we had a certain amount of experience going back and forth, working with Marvel Entertainment, working with one another, and knowing how to complement and collaborate with one another. There's also the point of view that we've been working on this for our entire lives up until now as lifelong fans.
I learned to read from British reprints, British Marvel, right? I mean, there was no British DC, there was British Marvel. And my theory about this actually is, as your audience members probably know, is Stan married an English woman. And I think one of the reasons he created British Marvel is that he could make all of his journeys across the pond to see her relatives would also be tax deductible trips. Because he was canny that way, and but whatever the reason, I wouldn't do what I do. I wouldn't be a professor of literature. I learned to read from this material. So in some ways you could say it's a lifelong preparation. But we first
realistically, it was December that we started working in absolute earnest on this, when we finally, after a couple of years of pandemic, after delays in the exhibition industry and in the entertainment industry, I think it was really the point where we all became at least fairly confident that we could accomplish this in time for the anniversary, in time for Comic-Con 2022, that there would be a Comic-Con 2022, that the museum would be open and there would, albeit masked and safety protocols would be in place, but people would be able to be welcomed back into a physical space. So when all of that came together, everything started happening very, very quickly.
We were having, I remember us having one very serious discussion about this with the design team prior to COVID in 2019, and then that happened and everything got backburnered. And then we had meetings here with the Comic-Con staff in October of last year. But in terms of things moving forward in earnest, it's the last 6 months have been kind of a whirlwind.
What would you say is the biggest challenge that you encountered in putting this together?
I mean, having to lift all of those short boxes and flip through all of those issues and scan all of those individual panels and covers was really just so difficult. I can't, it's such a, man, my.
Yeah, there haven't been, I mean, the biggest challenge really is figuring out what to leave out. When you have 60 years worth of material to work with across every media platform that you can imagine, it's, you know,
Thank you so much for talking with us. We
Take
really
care.
appreciate
Where are
it.
you located?
I'm in Omaha, Nebraska.
Nebraska.
We had
Okay, I have to
serious
write that
discussions
down.
about characters that really only the most hardcore Spider-Man fan would even remember their names, about whether to include them or not, you know. And I was, when we were actually going through this process again recently, and we were reminded how many characters we talked about, that we decided in the end they only appeared in, you know, 40 issues in the late 1970s, early 1980s, and everybody's forgotten who, I don't know, Deborah Whitman is now, right? So though the fact that we talked about them was striking to me. It's like how much effort we'd made before we then even excluded something. So that was really the toughest task, I think.
Yeah, trying to stay out of the weeds and, you know, present this in a way that it is accessible to a casual fan, that it's accessible to a hardcore fan, that it's accessible to, you know, a preschool kid who's seen Spidey and his amazing friends and just thinks that they look cool.
Right.
And we need to recognize that, you know, there's a vast range of ages, of demographics that will be coming to experience this, and we want to make sure that we're able to share it with all of them.
And when Patrick talks about us, you know, going through the short boxes and making scans, he's not joking. For a lot of the earlier material, for the first 30 years of the comic book material, the printed books have that 4-color Ben-Day dot process. What Marvel have in their archive are digital copies of modern reprints, which all have contemporary flat color. And there are, you know, pros and cons to both in terms of what it is that you want to read, but we really wanted there to be fidelity to that original source material. When we're blowing up an image from the 1970s, we want you to be able to see the grain and the texture of those dots, right? So the only way to do that is to scan the book. And that's so we scanned literally thousands
upon thousands
of images from our own collections, and then, you know, our media team did just amazing things with them.
So you talked a lot about having too much stuff and having to whittle it down. Let me ask that from the opposite perspective. Was there anything that you wanted to include that you weren't quite able to find or acquire?
There were tough decisions, but there were so many different ways to present this material. Ben mentioned, you know, there's the old Ben-Day dot pressings where we can scan a copy of a comic and reproduce that. There's the original art. There are these modern flat color, high resolution digital images. So anything that we wanted, we were able to sift through different versions of it and figure out what the best way to present that plot beat or that point was. And there are certainly things that, you know, we wish that it was a, you know, 20,000 million foot space. We, you know, getting to, even in a space this vast, trying to make a walkthrough of 60 years that you can get through in between 2 and 4 hours is a Herculean task.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, you know, the only things that I would maybe regret us not having in here are so obscure in terms of my own personal history. You mentioned the Electric Company. You know, in the 1970s, I owned a copy of Rock Reflections of a Superhero. You remember that recording from what year was that?
73, 74 maybe?
Something like that. It's a progressive rock band, you know, doing essentially a Spider-Man concept album. It would have been so much fun to, you know, figure out who actually owns the licensing for those recordings and make them available. But it would have been a reference that, you know, only people who bought that album in the 1970s would get. So we didn't do it. But those are, so, sometimes the personal associations that we have with this material, you put that to one side in order to be able to tell a more universally appealing story.
So I'm going to ask you a tough question now. If each of you had to pick one thing in the exhibit, this is the one thing, this is my favorite. What would each of you pick? A piece of art or interactive component? What's each of your most favorite?
It's always going to be a piece of art for me, I think. And it would be very difficult to choose just one, but there is if it's between either the Steve Ditko page showing Spider-Man in combat with Sandman. It's just such a classic, iconic piece of Ditko choreography, or one of these wonderful Romita Senior pages where you can still see the blue pencil underneath, probably the Dr. Octopus splash page from quite late in John Romita Senior's run of the book, where he's both penciling and inking himself. And Marvel still has some of the finest commercial artists and illustrators in the business. But in the 1960s, really some of the finest commercial artists of the 20th century are working at Marvel and coming up with these concepts and providing these the narratives and material. It's so for me, yes, it comes back to the art. It's also when you see those objects, the reminder that this global franchise starts with a hand and a piece of paper and somebody working with a pencil and a brush. I'm moved by that. I find myself really standing in front of these artworks, profoundly moved by that experience.
And for me, it's probably also a piece of art, but there's different ways to view that. We have the original cover art for Ultimate Fallout 4, which is the first appearance of Miles Morales, which is just on a historical level, that's the piece of original art that first depicts Miles Morales, who is Spider-Man to a generation now. And being able to display that, and then also the patch piece that they made for reprintings. In the first printing, going deep into the weeds here, the logo obscures his face. On later printings, they actually extended the illustration upwards. So they didn't draw the facial features on the original art. Mark Bagley created a patch piece that was then inserted over. So we have both of those pieces framed side by side, and you can see the first two depictions of Miles Morales. On a personal level, though, I don't know if there's a single element here that's my favorite, but the way that the amazing design team at Studio TK has realized our absolute craziest notions. Like, can we animate this? Can we add this element to augment the items that we're displaying? What can you do if we scan these at high resolution and send them to you? How can you make that work in a museum physical setting? And seeing what's been created, it's like, when it comes right down to it, obviously the original art is incredibly valuable and historically important, but also these giant backlit reproductions and these digital screens and the physical photo ops and the entire environment is so immersive and cohesive that I don't know that there is just one thing I can pick out.
Well, we should also mention too that besides this Amazing Spider-Man exhibit, there's other things that with people that come and visit the Comic-Con Museum. It's not just that Spider-Man that's there. There's a PAC-MAN Arcade currently there, where it's a neon lit arcade room featuring arcade games, artwork, memorabilia about Pac-Man. There's a Dave Stevens and the Rocketeer exhibit focusing on Dave Stevens' early work, animation, storyboards, props, pieces, all about the Rocketeer. There's an 8 Decades of Archie exhibit for those that like the Archie comics. It has vintage comic books, animation production materials, artwork, pieces of the set from the Riverdale series. And then there's a sneak preview of the Hemingway and the Comet comics exhibit about Ernest Hemingway as an artist and how he incorporated some of his work in comic books. So it's not just Spider-Man. You come on down to the museum, you're going to see all kinds of pop culture exhibits that sound amazing. I also want to mention
I
that
point out also that single admission does get you into all of those exhibits. There are not add-on charges to see the additional exhibits.
Right.
and we should also mention for those coming into San Diego for Comic-Con, they're doing another event on preview night, a night at the Comic-Con Museum. $250 will get you in, and you get food and drinks. There's Spider-Man's going to be inducted into the Character Hall of Fame. There's going to be special guests, music. You can see all the exhibits. The exhibits will be all open and available to walk through all night. So that's something that people coming in can look forward to. And if you can't make that opening night event, it'll be open all during Comic-Con, the weeks before Comic-Con, and the weeks after Comic-Con. How long is this Spider-Man exhibit going to be open? How long is it scheduled to be there?
From now through December 31st.
All right. So you have
we are also, if you are attending the comic convention and decide not to make it out to Balboa Park on Friday, you can come see the panel that we are presenting with Marvel, discussing Spider-Man's history and exhibition. So we're also a part of actual Comic-Con programming on site at the convention center.
awesome. That's a great way to learn more about the exhibit. We are almost out of time. Do you know what are the hours and how much does it cost for tickets? Do you have that information? If not, I have it
ticket
here.
prices vary depending on age and age, demographic, time of day. But the museum is open from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. 7 days a week. And it's, yeah, I think that's all the information I can 100% vouch for.
Yeah.
Well, I can't wait to see it. I will be there on preview night for the Hall of Fame ceremony, and I can't wait to see the exhibit. And I think I'm going to bring the family on the Monday after Comic-Con during the day to show the kids. The exhibit is called Spider-Man Beyond Amazing. And this is Patrick A. Reed and Ben Saunders. Gentlemen, thank you so much for chatting with us today on Cherry the Geek TV.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
All right.